It's another episode of Film Streak. My name is Rob. You know, there's been a bunch of films I've been watching here this year, and I think the ones that have really stuck out so far, mostly because they've kind of done something different, and yet they're not such a departure, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. Here's the thing. So far, at the beginning of this year, I think we've seen three pretty big I want to say successful films in terms of box office, but also audience kind of general reaction to. And that has been Thunderbolts or the New Avengers, Sinners, and here recently, kind of a surprise for me, I got to be honest, maybe a surprise for a lot of people, Final Destination Bloodlines. Now, Sinners was the first film I saw out of this group, and this was a film that I think came with some expectations because we're talking about a filmmaker, Ryan Coogler, who's done a little bit of, he's kind of danced in both worlds of being an indie filmmaker, but also really bringing out these big budget tentpole event type movies, including two Marvel movies, right? Black Panther, but also doing the Creed franchise and not directing each film, but being a part of it and really finding a way, having the vision to reinvigorate that whole thing and bring it into a new era. And I think that speaks more to like, well, there's someone who's got some technical know-how or some understanding. And there's real vision involved with pulling something like that off, I think. And so Sinners here, this is an interesting one because it's an original film in terms of the story, the premise, the characters, even the setting and the time period. I feel like it's something we don't really see a lot in films. And yet it's familiar enough because we're talking about vampires and we're talking about some of the rules or the tropes of vampires. And so we kind of understand a little bit of how things work. I think the novelty or the sort of unique angle of this film is that it's very much a film for grown-ups. I think there's something to be said for that, for making a film that doesn't really hold back and even explores some things that you kind of feel like you wish a film would go into, and this film does it. I think there's a lot of interesting elements to the story and some of the characters, of course. The filmmaking, the sort of wizardry of it is top-notch, but I think the main thing that stuck out to me, and I'm sure it's a pretty big component of the film just as a concept, is the music. It's funny, I got to say my experience with the film is a little bit kind of fractured because I went to go see this film in a theater, a local AMC theater. And, for me, the idea of seeing it in the theater, in an auditorium, with possibly an audience or, other people in the room, I think that's always a great aspect to enjoying a film, especially one like this where you get like real kind of audience reaction and you get that sense of people are being a little bit surprised or amazed or just engaged, right? And this film, I went to go see in the AMC theater, and they still, can you believe AMC, they're still running that thing before the film starts where it's Nicole Kidman talking about the magic of the movies and stuff. I mean, they brought that out when it was COVID and people weren't going to the movies and they were trying to convince people like it was okay and it was a good thing to go to the theater, which I agree. I think it is. But I feel like, we're like 5 years in now, and I don't really think people really pay any attention to the safety aspect of being in a room with a bunch of people anymore. And maybe they should for some part of it, but I think the larger kind of threat, I think that's really kind of gone now. And so this whole thing of still hanging on to, this is why we come to the movies, because the movies are magic, and Nicole Kidman with her freaky eyes, it just, it just seems unnecessary now. And the reason I bring all that up, of course, is because when that played at the beginning of seeing Sinners, I noticed the sound was off in that, right? I could hear like the surrounds in the theater, like the sort of echo, the reverb, like at the back of the theater behind me, and I could hear her voice in like the front and center, like the dialogue, the center channel, let's say, right? But I noticed like there was a big part of the sound that was missing, and I thought something. It didn't sound right. It didn't sound normal, I guess. But I assumed, oh, there's just some weird thing going on with this part of the presentation. But going through the film, I started to notice as Sinners starts up and you start to hear more of the music become a part of the story, I noticed like this music doesn't sound right. When they roll into town and he's telling the little girl about, hey, watch this truck. I'll pay you to watch this truck. Make sure nobody steals what's in my truck. There's music playing, but you can't hear it. I couldn't hear it in the scene. I could hear like the echo of music, but it just sounded very kind of far away. And in a different sort of film, I might think this is on purpose. Like it's supposed to give me kind of like a dreamlike sort of soundscape. And in this film, I just felt like now I'm missing something. There's a song that's supposed to be playing right now, and I can't hear it right. So anyway, as you go through the whole film, I heard like that was a problem throughout, especially when we get to the middle of the film, sort of where there's that big scene where Sammy, the youngest cousin of these two brothers, where he starts playing his music in this nightclub that these brothers have sort of started up. And the film really gets into a very interesting medley with all different types of genres and periods and styles of music. And it's really speaking to the, I don't know, the musical history. But that whole part of the film, the sound was completely washed out. It was completely muddy and it was a mess. And I could tell something was definitely wrong. I really thought, wait, I don't think this is how I'm supposed to be watching this film. I think it's supposed to sound better than this. It honestly, it didn't make the film bad for me, but it made me feel like I kind of got cheated, you know? And so I said, well, look, I need to see this film the right way because I feel like this film, there's something about it. There's something special to it. It feels like it's kind of a moment. I went back, watched it in IMAX. And I was very generously treated to an IMAX screening by my son. He paid for the tickets. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a real interesting experience to see this really the way I should have seen it the first time. And to see it on the big screen, on the biggest screen, and to see it with the correct sound mix and the music in full effect. Honestly, I think it really cemented like, oh no, this is like some real high level filmmaking going on here. And honestly, I think I enjoyed the film more because of all that. It's not that I didn't enjoy it the first time, but I could tell just there's something off and it just bugged me the whole time. And so to see it without those sorts of like, I don't know, things running in the background of my head of like, this isn't the way it's supposed to sound or look. I was able to really just kind of immerse myself in it, get lost in the characters and their sort of journey through this thing. Now, I got to say, if there's one thing about Sinners that it's not that I didn't enjoy it, but I kind of felt like it was just kind of revisiting something I'd already seen before. It was the sort of twist in the plot. And honestly, when I heard about the film, I don't know, a while back, and then when I saw, I think the first like teaser or trailer of it, I had no sense of what the big twist was. And I think it was only with like a follow-up trailer or a second look at it or whatever. And then the first reviews that, or even just the headlines for the film, they started to give away like there's something else in this film. And then eventually it became a thing of like, oh, here's what the film really is. And if you haven't seen it yet, I don't want to spoil it. I really don't, because I think it's such a fun and interesting way to enjoy the film is to just go into it blind. But if you paid any attention to anything about this film so far, you probably already been spoiled and maybe didn't even realize it. I was telling my son as we were watching it, I said, the thing this film reminds me of, the other film this film reminds me of, is From Dusk Till Dawn. And if you've seen that film, I've already spoiled it for you. So I'm sorry, but also you've probably already been spoiled. So there we go. But the idea that this film just sort of turns on a dime and goes from this period drama about these two brothers in the 30s in Mississippi and them trying to kind of, put some scheme together for a nightclub, make some money. It goes from that into this just wild and funny vampire movie. That was something that I wish that would not have been given away. I wish I would have really been able to walk into the film and never know that that was coming and just totally get blindsided by it. Because that is exactly what happened to me with From Dusk Till Dawn. I saw that film on opening night or the opening Friday when it came out. It was at 1995. And the only thing I knew about it, it was directed by Robert Rodriguez. It starred George Clooney and Quentin Tarantino. It was written by Quentin Tarantino. And I went on those three names alone that this is a film I got to watch. I'd seen Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs. I'd seen El Mariachi. I'd seen Desperado. I knew George Clooney from like ER, and that was really kind of his first big film, though. And all I knew was it was about two brothers, and they were kind of on the run or they're criminals or something. And man, I tell you what, to just get totally like hit in the side of the head with vampires in this strange like Mexican bar or truck stop or whatever it was. I mean, it could not have been a better surprise because it just totally flipped everything I was thinking I was getting into, but in a fun way. And it had fun with the genre. It didn't like kind of half-ass it. It really leaned into like, oh yeah, this is all about to get weird. That was the only thing about Sinners that I really wish it wouldn't have been kind of given away so quickly or so easily in any of the promotions or the reviews and people's comments about it. And of course, here I am doing it too. But there's a reason why I kind of held off on talking about this film for a little while. I mean, I saw this opening night, and then I saw it again the following week. And so to me, I felt like, well, I guess at this point, it's okay to spoil it, because if you haven't seen it, you've probably been spoiled. And if you have seen it, you probably thought the same thing. So for me, it's been an interesting look at a filmmaker who not only has kind of put something together that's original, but has taken some steps to really secure this for himself. There's parts of the story I could get into about the brothers and the other characters and where does it possibly go. People have already talked about like sequels or prequels or spinoffs based on some of the things that happen in the film and some of the characters that are in it. And there's a pretty interesting like mid-credit sequence with Buddy Guy as a blues musician, as one of the characters. And to me, that was so fascinating. I mean, it was great to see Buddy Guy on screen and playing music. I mean, I've listened to his music for decades now. And to see him get some props and get some screen time, I mean, that was amazing. And yet, I almost feel like, this is fine. Leave it like this. I enjoyed it the second time more than the first time, but I enjoyed it both times. And so, it makes me think of something like Thunderbolts, which, I did an episode here recently where I was talking about some of the more, I guess the later era Marvel stuff, particularly coming out of Sony, but even the last Captain America film, where I just felt like, man, there's so much that's just not working with all of those films. And so much kind of potential and also room for exploration with either these characters or this universe. And none of those films really seem to know what to do there. Captain America, of course, because it is directly from Marvel, I think it does try to still fit and play on those terms. There are things in Captain America Brave New World that do get, I guess, mentioned in Thunderbolts, and it does seem to kind of lead into it. But Thunderbolts on its own, it is kind of the film I was hoping for, really. It takes a very different approach than I was expecting, in the sense that it's not so much about heroes. I mean, there are really no heroes in the film. They're all anti-heroes. They're all the villains from past films. And now they have to sort of work together and I guess sort of defeat a sort of supervillain. And yet the reason behind all of the villainous behavior, it's still something that people can relate to, which was a little bit surprising, a little bit shocking that this didn't turn into some big cosmic thing. It isn't Thanos. It isn't some of the sort of magical wizardry doodad type stuff that's like, hard to buy. This is about a character who has dealt with pain and suffered and emotional trauma and his own way of trying to, I guess, exercise that, and not exercise, but exorcise that, is to become either this superhero or supervillain. And I guess in a way, sort of like the Hulk, where he has to find a way to keep a lid on it. And that's kind of, it's not revealed until much later in the film, but that's kind of the whole core of this thing, because it's also the same struggle that all the other characters are dealing with. You've got all these characters in this film that are also dealing with this same sort of dilemma, this same sort of mental trauma and anguish over things that have happened and things that we've seen in other films now. So in a way, it starts to make all the other stuff that we'd seen before, which, I previously thought, where was that ever going? Now it makes some of that stuff make sense. And you see the baggage that these characters are dealing with and how they end up having to process some of that. And ultimately kind of come together, work together to shut down this supervillain. And so, I don't know anything about some of these characters at this point. Like I said before in another episode, that we're so far into the weeds with all these superheroes and supervillains that they're kind of just like people now. They're just like other characters. And I think this film smartly does the thing where it reminds us, like, these people aren't super powered. They are regular people. They just happen to have maybe more abilities in the sense of, they're better at some stuff. There's a line in the film. It's like, oh, we just punch and shoot. They can't fly. They can't like walk through walls and all that. And so the film kind of works with that in mind. It's like just dealing with things that everyday people, you or I, will have to deal with at some point in life, and uses that to its advantage, which is kind of a tricky thing if you think about it. It's like, this is not Marvel's normal territory. Maybe they've done that in some of the TV shows, but in the films, it's like, oh no, we get like real big picture, real high stakes, and real kind of existential with, the fate of the world is at stake and what sort of magic is going to be involved to save it. This, it's not really that. I mean, there is an element of this sort of psychic kind of bond and connection that these characters have to have and how they have to use that. But it's not a glove with a bunch of stones on it, It's a little more down to earth. The end result being that these characters, this team, which started as the Thunderbolts and was marketed as it, Disney, Marvel, whatever, they pulled off this whole thing of like, oh, the movie's been out for 2 weeks, we're changing the title. And if you haven't seen the film by then, well, you just got spoiled, maybe. Maybe you don't even know what that means if you still haven't seen the film yet. But by the end of this film, I mean, it's been a while. I've also tried to hold off on talking about this until now. These characters, they become labeled the new Avengers. And so now going into the next Marvel film or the Marvel films that are coming, these are going to be the new team. Now, we still have like the regular Avengers, I guess, right? But this is kind of a whole new spin on things. This throws a real wrinkle into what I guess I thought was going to happen in the next film or the next few films. So I'm curious where this all goes. And I got to say, for Marvel and the state of where their films were going, I think this is really going to help turn some things around. Because not only is it saying, hey, look, we did a lot of this stuff and maybe it never really seemed like it was going anywhere. And maybe it wasn't going anywhere. But here we've tried to like loop back and catch up with some of that and pick it up and make it work. And now maybe we're all pointing all the ships in the same direction again. And so it's a positive sign, I suppose. It's something that definitely kind of helped me be excited about this whole, this whole cinematic universe and really want to see what happens next. I'm still not sure if I'm crazy about Fantastic Four, but with these characters and with the next Avengers film, that I feel like, okay, I'm down to see that. There's a big thing at the end of this that really leads into that. Not so much into Fantastic Four, but whatever, what's it called? What's it going to be called? Avengers Doomsday? Is that the next Avengers film? There's a post-credit sequence, a scene, and it's pretty lengthy. It's not like just, a minute and a half. It's a few minutes long, and it really says a lot. And it is a part of, from what I've seen, it is a part of the next Avengers film. We're kind of like skipping past some of the stuff that happens in Fantastic Four. Cool, fine, whatever. But this is, I feel like things are getting back on track. This is just the vibe I'm coming away with. So for me, it's all gravy now. I was really kind of checked out with all the Marvel stuff. And this kind of got me back into the fold. That, and I ended up watching season 2 of Loki, which I had just kind of disregarded at some point. And when I saw that, connected with this film, and then even with the Deadpool and Wolverine, that season 2 of Loki really kind of helps correct some of, some of my own like perspective or outlook for where all this Marvel stuff is going. Because, if you get through it, here's the thing with season 2 of Loki, if anybody's interested, if you haven't seen it, it really takes everything that was happening, all the stuff that was going on with like Kang and the Ant-Man movie and all the like multiverse stuff and timelines and all that. It really does a lot of mental gymnastics to change that whole thing, to just steer that boat in a whole new direction. And it was not easy. Honestly, there were some parts of that second season of Loki that I was barely following, like what the hell was happening. There's a lot of like technobabble and like just theory and sort of, spinning all of this ideology about like timelines and the nature of existence and universes and all this stuff. And I kind of thought, all right, I don't even care at this point. Just get me on a new road because we're so far out in the middle of nowhere. And by the end of it, it does kind of do that. It does pull you back around to be like, all right, well, we were doing that. You can kind of tell we were going in one direction. Now we've totally changed. We're going over here now. And now that does line up with this movie, with Captain America, with, I guess, supposedly, presumably, the next Avengers movies. We're going to see everything kind of come around to a new place. And so, that's another thing that I think helps. I really kind of disregarded all the TV series because I thought they're just too much and I kind of don't care. And I didn't really think they tied in that much to the films. Now, this Loki doesn't really tie in directly, but I think what it does is it changes the rules. It kind of redefines the sandbox, let's say. So now I think the films that are coming out from this point on, they will play in that new sandbox, not in the old one. Which, hey, as long as it's less confusing, I'm down with that. And so the last film I want to talk about here for a minute is Final Destination Bloodlines. You know, look, if you've ever seen these films, there's a series of films. There's 5 films that came out. The last one was like, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. And I don't want to say I grew up with these films because I mean, these films, I was well into being an adult when the first one came out in 2000. But they are certainly one of those franchises that I felt like, oh man, this thing has really done something new. You know, there was the Scream franchise that hit in the 90s, and that felt like it was different and fun because it was kind of just mocking and taking all the air out of previous horror franchises, right? So it was kind of poking fun at itself and at the genre as a whole, right? But Final Destination did something very different in the sense that there's really no key, like, antagonist. There's no actual villain in the films. And yet, it boils so much of its premise down to the simple thing that you don't need an antagonist. When it really comes down to it, me going through my life every day to day, and you and everybody else out there, we're not dealing with bad guys in our lives. We're just dealing with surviving. And sometimes surviving just means just paying your bills or making sure you have food on your table. Sometimes surviving means like I just try to not get killed in a car accident sometimes when I get in my car and get on the highway. And that is, I think, the really kind of base thing, the sort of primal appeal of these films is that danger and death can be around any corner in life. And it can happen through any sort of series of unfortunate events or circumstances, and you won't even see it coming. And so the first film, the way it sets that whole thing up, and then each film kind of either sort of repeats the idea or builds on it. I think that's just a magic formula, honestly. I'm surprised they stopped making these films all those years ago. It took them this long to make a sequel because it just seems like you could just come back to this every few years. I mean, you could have more Final Destination films than Saw films. And there's like 12 of those or something. Because these, as long as you can come up with the sort of creative, elaborate, these sort of Rube Goldberg-esque ways that people die in these films, I mean, as long as you can do that creatively and cleverly, then you've got story here. Now, I guess the thing, of course, is that these films, this specific corner of horror films, it was really born out of something else, and you kind of have to keep that in mind. You know, I'm kind of surprised this film now, Final Destination: Bloodlines, it's. I'm kind of surprised it got made because I feel like these are just way more sensitive times, and we're way more kind of averse to things that really push boundaries and challenge in a way. That's my sense of it, you know? I feel like a lot of times I'm wrong, but just thinking of people and society in general, it feels like there's no reason why anybody would approve or greenlight a film like this. But then you could have said that about Sinners. You could have said that about films like The Substance last year. Like, there's no reason anybody would think this is a good idea to make this film, other than it's a good idea. And so Final Destination: Bloodlines, it is one of those films that, look, you could cut it a few different ways, but it still boils down to that thing of like, you want to see this, but you don't want to see this, but you do want to see this, right? And smartly, this film isn't just a repeat of the same formula of the first 5 films. It does try to do something new, which I do appreciate. I do appreciate that it does try to dig deeper into the sort of rules and the, I don't know, the mythology or the sort of the lore of Final Destination and like Death's plan and how you can change or challenge or defeat Death's plan. Whatever. But the thing is, like, it took 5 films for that to happen. Like, those first 5 films, there were little ways that some of the characters tried to like cheat their way around this idea. But in this film, we actually get to see either like the beginning of it in the sense of like something that happened decades earlier and how a character decided to take action. But then we also see that character start to really map out like how it actually works and how to get around the rules. And of course, these rules are all fictional. There's no rules to Death's plan. But if that's the sort of world that these films are set up in, well, okay, here's a character that finally figured it out after 5 or let's say 6 films. They really thought, oh, we should actually try and see if a character is smart enough to defeat this. It's like it's not just another film in the franchise. It actually does try to dig deeper and give us more to think about and more for the characters to kind of really get challenged with, honestly. I got to say, the one thing is that it just took me out of the film because if you know, most of these films, the characters are young people. They're either like high school or college age. And I think that's something very specific to this genre, this premise, the premise of all these films, this sort of fascination, but also terror at the thought of death coming after you. I think that's really kind of a young person's thing, if I got to be honest. I think you get past a certain age and you don't really think about it the same way. You think about it as a thing that can happen, but you sort of lose the morbid sort of fascination with it and how grotesque it can be or how horrible it can be, right? And you really start to honestly kind of fear it in a different way. If you're talking about the idea of death with your children or with family or loved ones, that's different than I'm just driving way too fast in my hot rod and I'm just going to see what happens and hopefully I don't die. You know what I mean? It's just a different way of looking at it. Of course, as you get much older, I'm sure there's even another way to look at death of like, yeah, it's just sitting right there in the next room, just waiting for me to get up. I don't know. But the thing is, like, I feel like these types of films, this story, it works for a certain audience of a certain age one way, and it works for a different audience maybe in a different way, but equally just as intriguing, I think. I remember seeing the earlier films, and they are violent, they are gory, they are graphic, and they are pretty disturbing and depraved, like some of the ways that people die in these films. They're not entirely unrealistic, although they are really kind of manufactured. But this most recent film, Bloodlines, I really found myself at a point where I'm like, and maybe it has to do with like the way the films are produced. Like so much of it looks so realistic now. Like it's very clear that like this isn't just like, I don't know, movie trickery going on. It feels very convincing that I kind of wanted to look away at some of this stuff, you know? I've seen violent films before. I've seen gory horror films and all that, but something about the idea of young people and like honestly, people my kids' age dying in these really horrible ways, it just really kind of half disturbed me. Some of it is also kind of amusing, which is strange. It's just kind of dark humor to it. But there is also an element of like, I really wouldn't want that to happen, like just kicking off in the back of my head. And it's a strange thing that I don't remember feeling with the earlier films, 15, 20, 25 years ago when they first were coming out. So maybe that's an age thing. Maybe that's just things changing with time or with society even. But the fact that it had a big opening weekend and seems to be on track to do similar type of business, I feel like, well, I mean, people are there. People are there for it. Whether it's the actual idea of these sort of insanely crafty death scenes and kills, or just the idea of like the bigger picture of, death. It's a mystery to us. It will always be a mystery to us. And the nature of how someone can die or will die, are there rules to it? Is there a plan to it? Is it random? Can we do anything about it? I think those are things we're always going to be dealing with. Those are questions we're always going to have. And so this film tries to have some fun with it, but also maybe make you think a little bit. I don't know. Maybe that's kind of a bigger that's bigger praise for a Final Destination film than it might be looking for. But that's kind of my take on it. The fact that there are 6 films now in this franchise, that says something, right? So anyway, that's some of the more recent films that I've seen here recently in theaters. And, the next film, the next big film I think of the year, which is about to hit as I'm recording this, is the next not Final Destination, the next Mission Impossible film. And I got to say, without talking it up too much, I guess, but it's really intriguing me what this film might be. So I'll save that for later, for another time. Hopefully I get to watch that soon. Hopefully I get to watch that on the big screen. And in the meantime, hey, look, go to filmstreet.com. You can find other episodes. You can listen to these in Apple Music or Spotify. They're on YouTube. But you can also get them by email if you want to do that. You can just get them right to your inbox. Also, I have a list of all these films on IMDb. I know I always say that. People have asked me about Letterboxd here and there. I'm on it. I have an account and I have this list, but it's not really kept up because I just don't go there very often. But look, if Letterboxd makes more sense, if that is something that you feel like more people or you listening to this would use or go to or refer to, whatever, let me know. I'll add these films on there. So in the meantime, that's it for me. I'm out. And you know what it is. You know what to do. Go watch something new.